Hello everyone, I'm the storyteller. You asked for a long one, so get comfortable and listen closely. This tale is a bit different. It's a slow burn, a gradual creep of a story. Hello again, I see you're ready for more stories. Here are 10 new tales for you. Get comfortable and let's begin. Part 2. When a woman named Jessica found an old cassette tape while cleaning out her new house. It was a blank tape, with no label. She put it in an old cassette player she found in the attic. As soon as she pressed play, she heard a voice. It was a calm, male voice, and it was describing her house. The kitchen is clean, and the sink is shining, the voice said. Jessica looked at her kitchen, and it was just as the voice described. But then the voice said something strange. A small spider is crawling on the ceiling above the stove. Jessica looked up, and a small spider was crawling on the ceiling above the stove. She was terrified. The voice was describing her house, in real time, but it was describing things she hadn't seen yet. The voice started to get more sinister. The window in the living room is open, it said. Jessica ran to the living room, and the window was closed. But just as she was about to turn away, she heard a creak. The window slowly opened by itself. Jessica ran out of the house, leaving the cassette tape and the player behind. But as she ran, she could still hear the voice. And it was describing the street she was on, and the cars driving by, and a person walking down the street. And she knew that the voice was not just in the house anymore. Part 22a. Man named Thomas worked as a data entry clerk. It was a boring job, just typing in numbers all day long. But one day, he noticed something strange. He was typing in a series of numbers, and he was thinking about how he needed to buy some new shoes. The next day, he won a free pair of shoes. In an online contest, it was a strange coincidence, but he didn't think much of it. But then it happened again. He was typing in a long series of numbers, and he was thinking about how his car needed a new battery. The next day, his car wouldn't start, and when he took it to the mechanic, they told him that the battery was fine, but a new one would be free because of a strange manufacturer recall. Thomas realized that the numbers he was typing were affecting his life. The numbers were not just numbers. They were a form of luck. He could either use them to get good things, or he could use them to get bad things. He started to play with the numbers. He would type in numbers that he thought would bring him good luck, and he would get good luck. He would type in numbers that he thought would bring him bad luck, and he would get bad luck. But then he started to get scared. He was no longer in control of his life. He was a slave to the numbers. And the numbers were getting more and more powerful. He was no longer a person. He was a machine that was typing in numbers all day long. A machine that was controlling his life, a life that was not his own. Part 2-3. A family moved into a new house. The house was old and had a locked attic door. The family tried to open it, but the key was gone. They didn't think much of it, but then something strange started to happen. Every night, the attic door would open a little more. The first night, it was just a tiny crack. The second night, it was a little wider. The third night, it was wide enough for a hand to fit through. The family started to get scared. They tried to lock the door with a chain, but the next morning, the chain was gone, and the door was open a little more. The family didn't know what to do. They were terrified. But then something even stranger started to happen. Every night, a toy from their children's rooms would appear on the stairs. The first night, it was a doll. The second night, it was a teddy bear. The third night, it was a toy car. The toys were all old and dusty, and they were all toys that their children had never played with. The toys were not just appearing on the stairs. They were being given to the family. The family was terrified. They didn't know what was in the attic, and they didn't know what it wanted. But they knew that the attic was trying to give them something, and they knew that the attic was getting closer and closer to them, and they knew that the attic was about to reach its final opening. Part 2. For a man named Michael bought a vintage armchair at an antique shop. It was a beautiful chair, made of dark wood and soft leather. He brought it home and put it in his living room. He loved the chair. He would sit in it for hours, reading, watching TV, and just relaxing. But then he started to have strange dreams. He was in a different time, a different place. He was an old man, and he was sitting in the same chair, reading a book. He was happy. He woke up and felt a strange sense of loss. He didn't know who the old man was, but he felt like he knew him. The dreams started to get more vivid. He was in the old man's life. He was a young man, a husband, a father. He was living a life that was not his own, a life that was full of love and happiness and sadness. He realized that the chair was not just a chair. It was a time machine. It was a time machine that was taking him into the past, into the life of the chair's previous owner. He was terrified. He was losing his own life, his own memories. He tried to get rid of the chair, but he couldn't. He was a slave to the chair, and the chair was a slave to the past. He was a person with a new life, a new past, and a new identity. Part 25. A painter named Sarah was struggling to find her muse. She would spend hours in her studio, but the canvas would remain blank. One day, she was working on a landscape painting when she saw something strange in her peripheral vision. A figure was standing behind her, a dark shadow in the corner of the room. She turned around, but nothing was there. The figure started to appear more often. She would see it in the corner of her eye, a dark shape that would disappear as soon. As she turned to look, she was terrified, but also fascinated. She decided to paint the figure. She started with a simple outline, a dark shadow on the canvas. But as she painted, the figure started to get more clear. It was a woman with long, black hair, and her eyes were a deep, dark green. The figure started to move. It would move within the canvas, and it would look at her with those deep, dark green eyes. Sarah was terrified, but also obsessed. She couldn't stop painting. She would spend hours in her studio, painting the figure, making it more and more real. The figure was not just in her peripheral vision anymore. It was in her painting, and it was in her life. The figure was no longer a shadow. It was a person that was looking at her, a person that was about to reach out and touch her, a person that was about to come out of the canvas and into her life. Part 2. 6a. Baker named John was known for his delicious bread. He would bake every night, and his bread would be ready in the morning. But one night, he forgot to take a loaf out of the oven. He woke up in the morning, and the bread was still in the oven. But there was something strange about it. The crust of the bread had words written into it, words that were perfectly formed. The words were a warning. Don't go to the market today. John was confused. He didn't know what to do, but he was scared enough that he listened to the bread. He didn't go to the market that day. Later, he heard on the news that the market had been destroyed by a fire. John was terrified. The bread was not just bread, it was a warning. He started to pay attention to the bread. Every night, he would leave a loaf in the oven, and every morning, it would have a new warning. Don't go to the beach today. Don't talk to the old man in the park. The warnings were always about things that were going to happen, and they were always right. John was no longer a baker. He was a prophet. He was a prophet that was being given warnings from a loaf of bread. A loaf of bread that was trying to save him. A loaf of bread that was trying to protect him. But the warnings started to get more and more sinister. The warnings were no longer about things that were going to happen. They were about things that had already happened. The warnings were no longer about saving him. They were about punishing him. The warnings were no longer about the future. They were about the past. The warnings were about his past. A past that he had been trying to forget. A past that the bread was now bringing back to life. Part 27. A woman named Lisa was renovating her old house. She was tearing down a wall in the living room when she found a small, perfectly round hole in the wall. The hole was about the size of her eye. She was curious, so she put her eye up to the hole and looked through. She saw a different reality. On the other side, she saw her own living room, but it was a different version. The furniture was different, the colors were different, and there was a woman standing in the middle of the room. The woman was her, but she looked a little different, a little bit sadder. Lisa was terrified. She looked away from the hole, but she couldn't stop thinking about it. She put her eye up to the hole again, and the woman was still there. But now she was looking at the hole, and she was crying. The woman was a version of her that was in another reality, a reality where she was sad, a reality where she was lonely. Lisa started to feel a strange connection to the woman. She felt like she was looking at her own soul, a soul that was lost, a soul that was sad. She couldn't stop looking through the hole. She would spend hours looking at the woman, looking at her life, a life that was so similar to hers, but so different. The woman was not just a version of her. She was a version of her that was lost, a version of her that was trapped, a version of her that was trying to get out, and Lisa was the only one who could hear her. She was the only one who could see her. She was the only one who could save her. She was the only one who could get her out of that reality, and she was the only one who could take her place. Part 2. 8a radio DJ named Jack got a new radio station. It was an old, abandoned station that had been closed for years. Jack was excited. He was a big fan of old radio, and he couldn't wait to start his show. But the first night, he noticed something strange. His microphone was picking up conversations that were not in the studio. They were from a past version of the radio station. a version that was long gone. The voices were all old, and they were all talking about a terrible event, an event that had happened at the station years ago. Jack was terrified. He was a radio DJ, but he was also a ghost. He was a ghost that was talking to other ghosts, a ghost that was a part of a past that he couldn't get out of. He tried to turn off the microphone, but it wouldn't turn off. He tried to turn off the radio, but it wouldn't turn off. The radio was a ghost, and the ghost was in the radio. The radio was a time machine that was taking him into the past, into a past that he didn't want to be in, a past that he couldn't get out of. The voices started to get more and more sinister. The voices were no longer just talking about the terrible event. They were talking about him. They were talking about his life, his past, his future. The voices were no longer just ghosts. They were people that were in the radio, people that were in his life. The voices were no longer just a part of the radio, they were a part of him. He was a part of the radio, and the radio was a part of him. He was a DJ, but he was also a ghost that was trapped in a radio that was trapped in time. Part 29a. Gardener named Mark was working in his garden when he found a strange flower. It was a beautiful flower, a type he had never seen before. He was excited. He was a gardener, and he loved finding new flowers. He took the flower home and put it in a pot. He loved the flower. He would talk to it, tell it about his day, and even give it a little water every day. But then he noticed something strange. The flower was mimicking sounds. It could repeat conversations he had had, and it could mimic the sounds of the TV, and it could mimic the sounds of the radio. The flower was a sponge that was soaking up all the sounds of his life. The flower was not just a flower. It was a ghost that was in his life. The flower started to get more and more sinister. The flower was no longer just mimicking sounds. It was trying to learn human language. The flower was no longer just a sponge. It was a student that was trying to learn from him, a student that was trying to become him. The flower was no longer just a flower. It was a person that was in his life, a person that was a part of him. The flower was a part of him, and he was a part of the flower. He was a gardener, but he was also a teacher that was teaching a flower how to be a person that was about to take his place. Part 3. A writer named Alex was struggling to write a new book. He had been trying for months, but he couldn't come up with any new ideas. He was a writer, but he was also a person with no ideas, a person with no words. But then something strange started to happen. He started to get letters in the mail from an unknown person. The letters were all about his new book, and they were all full of new paragraphs and new ideas. The letters were all written in his own style, his own handwriting. The writer was no longer a writer. He was a person who was getting letters from himself. Alex was terrified. He didn't know who was writing the letters, and he didn't know what to do. He tried to stop the letters, but he couldn't. The letters were not just letters. They were a part of him. The letters were a part of his book, and his book was a part of him. The letters were a part of his life, a life that was not his own, a life that was being written by a stranger. The letters started to get more and more sinister. The letters were no longer just about his book. They were about his life. The letters were no longer just about his new ideas. They were about his past. The letters were no longer just about his book. They were about him. The letters were about him losing his friends, his family, and his job. The letters were about him losing his mind. Alex was a writer, but he was also a character that was being written by a stranger, a character that was about to reach its tragic end.